Good morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Hugh David.
And I'm your other co-host, Dev. And on today's show, we are going to be looking at minute 38, where Martin talks about himself feeling temporary and making sure that Paul is completely unable to close on this deal.
And joining us all this week, if you've been listening to us for the last couple of episodes, you've been listening to the wonderful voice of David Brook of Blueprint Review and DTV Productions. Welcome again, David.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Excellent. How are you, sir? You well?
Not bad at all.
Fantastic. So, we were talking about, in the last minute, we were discussing the arrival of the local security guy to interrupt the deal, except Martin and him recognize each other and have a conversation. But now is the point where this is all going to go horribly wrong for Paul. Poor old Paul.
I find the framing of this is interesting, and I think it's in part just to facilitate the introduction of Terry into the scene. But I can't think of a neighborhood like this ever spending any amount of time out front of a house. I don't think anybody really does that, right? Like you're either in the house or in the backyard. And I feel like if you're showing the house, everybody would be inside having these conversations. And I totally get why he pulled over, right? Like there's this weird guy in front of the house who's loitering in front of houses like this.
I suppose.
But it does frame this like conversation. It builds that awkwardness because you're in this like between space where you normally don't ever spend time. You're either in the process of leaving or in the process of arriving. But it sets a weird tone for this minute, and we're gonna kind of double down on that weirdness, I think, as we go through this minute.
Well, you're talking about the framing. I mean, the other thing is, I said last minute about the composition, and that continues here. You know, whereas before we had Paul and the couple in the background, and we had Martin and Terry in the foreground. Now what happens is we have this switch over, and actually it's the the Grosse Pointe Blank Michigan boys in one frame, and then we cut to the interlopers coming in from, I guess, Chicago or wherever to buy this, and Paul, who has clearly decided to move to the other side, so to speak. You know, he's gone to the devil, and I can never work out in this minute if Martin is being sincere in saying what he's saying, given the guy we've come to know who is in, you know, dealing with his own traumas and his own background and all the rest of it and goes to see a therapist, or whether he is winding up his pal the way I imagine they would have done back in the day.
I feel like, I mean, I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get anything about this dialogue.
Oh, really?
Martin, in every other scene of the film, Martin has problems, but he's usually pretty erudite, pretty pithy. He's pretty charismatic. You know, he's always had that, right? Like his teacher looks back at him with fondness. He's a guy that's pretty well liked, and in his dialogue here just misses the mark in pretty much every way.
I think for me though, the way I kind of read this moment is I think he's trying to, in my mind, he's trying to back up his friend Paul's like BS kind of story to try and sell the house for them. But the thing is, I think that's the thing with Martin. Although he's very witty, he's very erudite, as you say, he tends to be no nonsense. He doesn't really. He tends to speak the truth in a way. As I say, throughout the film, he tells people that he's a hitman, and which normally people probably wouldn't say that. And in my mind, it feels as though he's trying to do that kind of sales spiel, but he can't. It's just not him. It's not his personality. And the way they kind of pitch, obviously, as you say, they pitch the characters. They look so different as well. You've got this super perfect kind of couple, white shirts on. He's got a hand on the shoulders, kind of loving, typical all American couple. And then Martin's all in black sunglasses. And I think the whole idea of this is just to show how different he is from these kind of normal Americans. It's
Yeah. I mean, I think there is, maybe an element here of him trying to discover what he should be looking for in life, right? Like he's the thing that everybody gets taught is, you find a partner, you settle down in a house in the suburbs, like that's the thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, like it's definitely him trying to project that, but it just it feels weird to me. It doesn't feel like it's a sincere effort. Even when you talk the sales pitch side of things, like he ends up having to sell Dr. Oatman on continuing to hear him, right? And he pulls that off.
He does that out of fear, though. That's the thing. I think a lot of the time.
Yeah,
that's
there is an
thing,
element of that. Yeah, that's fair.
And again, through the truth, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. But I in answer to your earlier question, Hugh, I don't think this was done intentionally to try and mess up the sale or to it's not a schoolyard prank. I don't feel like these two are at that point in their life anymore where that's the kind of stunt they pull. I think we definitely meet characters at the reunion who are in that at that point still.
Yeah.
One of them actually is one of the callers into the radio station. As well, right? So, but it doesn't feel right for these characters.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just thought I'd raise it because I've never. Again, we've talked about in previous episodes, both with yourself, David, and with the others. We've talked about tone and the way this film, adjusts and massages together various types of genres and aspects of genres, as well as the tones that can be applied to them. And that was always. This is possibly the one part of the film where I was always a little bit like, is it not? But yeah, no. Now you guys say it, I'm thinking sincerity is the key. Failed sincerity, poorly delivered sincerity.
Yeah.
But yes, sincerity nevertheless.
Yeah.
I think the problem I had more with this scene is where it goes just after this is where the blame gets shifted for the couple running away. It gets shifted to Terry.
Yes.
And then it just makes that whole bit just makes Paul seem really nasty. And I don't know if I feel that anywhere else in the film. I think it just seems out of touch for him. I don't really have a problem with Martin's kind of involvement in this scene and what happens with him. I kind of like his little what he said then. But yeah, I think for me it's the kind of sudden nastiness towards Terry. It just seems a bit. I don't know. It doesn't add anything to me. It seems a bit out of nowhere. I don't know if it's just playing with that idea of maybe Paul is still a bit back in his high school days bullying this guy.
I think so. Yeah.
I guess. I mean, that is the point of it, really. But
that makes
I don't know.
Sense.
It didn't. I don't know. But that was what jarred to me more than kind of Martin kind of mucking up the sale on the house.
I think there is. It's definitely that harking back to the high school thing. I think that. It's not just here, it's at several points in the film. Paul is always that like slightly insecure, slightly sycophantic friend of the cool guy, and is always like wanting to prove that, right? He drives by Debbie's house and he ultimately helps out with the body and things like that. But it's also like the protectiveness of his position and the insecurity when there's someone else that Martin was also friendly with, kind of seeming to usurp that position. That's the impression I get, but it does definitely give a suddenly dark tone to Paul's character, which does make him much more interesting, much less two-dimensional.
True.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I get is it's also an interesting way of filling in what things are like while Martin's been away, and that, as you guys say, the dynamic has not shifted nearly as far from high school days as you'd think between Paul and Terry. But also it's interesting to note that I think, I mean, it's quite, we get this the impression of how often has this happened between them? Like, Paul's obviously there in the, he's a real estate guy. He sells stuff in this area. I can imagine how irritating it must be to have this guy turn up every time you're trying to do a sale. And they're like,
But
why is there security here?
At the same time, Terry makes a really good point. He is more part of the neighborhood than Paul is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the
it
point,
does feel like there's depth to this antagonism, and I think it's more emphasis on that growing divide. The haves and the have-nots, and it builds on that, and I think it highlights that whereas Martin is kind of living largely outside of this world because of what he does and because of the route that he took. Paul and Terry have fallen straight into this dichotomy. They're stuck in this rut. They're seeing everything through that lens. And you get to be with Martin. You get to maybe sit outside it a little bit and watch it unfold and see just how ugly it is, that this is the world that's kind of come about as a result of economic changes in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and I would argue that he doesn't. Until now, given the job he does and the world he works in, I wonder how much he's noticed those changes. I wonder if this is his first time really kind of letting it all comes home for a moment.
Yeah. It does all seem, he seems kind of alien to it all in a way, and vice versa.
I mean, he's
good word, alien, for this context, isn't it? He is kind of like that. He's a little bit man, a man from Man Who Fell to Earth, isn't he? A little bit of that. The way his posture and his height and the way he dresses and the way he leans in as well is like, okay, this is interesting.
This isn't in this minute really. I think it was in, but you can see it in a lot of the other ones. I love in the film the constant twitchiness, like he's always got his hand near his like holster or something, and it's constantly on edge. It's a nice little touch, and Dan Aykroyd as well.
Oh yeah.
Although he overplays it a bit more, as we mentioned on the other episode.
It is fun, though. So much fun. I mean, these are exactly the things that keep the film working for us, I think, even in these weirder moments.
Yeah. I wonder what the other takes of this scene look like. I think for most of the movie, I'm fairly comfortable with the take that was chosen for the final cut. It feels great and enjoyable, and I'm not sure that there is a better take of this scene. I think it may just be the nature of the scene itself and what's written in, and it kind of maybe even what Armitage was trying to get out of the scene. But it does feel kind of weird. The camera work in this scene is also really interesting, right? Martin is always kind of ahead above all of the other heads in every shot. He's always, it's again underscoring that standing apart nature of it. And this weird scene towards the end of the minute where we talk about Paul dressing down Terry and kind of ripping into him, and the way that Martin stands in the background, like watching him in that minute it's very weird. Like he's kind of there, but he's not engaged particularly. He's just spectating casually, like something's going on in front of him, but it's not like he's watching what's going on. Or
there's a moment where he gestures and tries to get involved, but then he kind of just leaves it.
Yeah.
He doesn't really know what to do.
No, that's true. Well, it is half the fun of this film is the way he is just out of his depth. Just does not know what he's like. There are times when he's just does not know what he's doing, and that's the fun of it, isn't it? Instead of the 90s hitman movie thing where the guy's out of his depth in other ways, this is the comedy version. Oh look, normal life is not what you understand or how it works, and normal dynamics do not make sense to you.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me, I honestly feel like this film would have lost nothing by cutting this scene. There's nothing. There's some interesting commentary. We've had plenty of material to talk about the last couple of minutes, in terms of the subtext of the film. But as a film, if this minute was cut, if instead of getting a little bit ahead, but the conversation that's going to happen right at the top of the next minute, which I think is a little bit important, for their relationship. That could have happened when they were getting into the car on Main Street, right? Like right after they're talking about Bob DiStefano, and then they could have moved on to the other things, and they could have just been cruising like they probably did when they were in high school. I really don't think that would have particularly changed the film. We would have missed out on Terry Rothston, and I think he's an entertaining character later on in the film for the couple of moments that we see him. But
well, given he's a producer and a writer, I think
that's probably why the scene stayed in.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think there are some other merits to the scene in terms of, Paul has kind of made it by the standards of, where he lives, but he's also not at the top of his game there, right? Like he's still growing. No. He's 10 years out of high school, and he's not just like hardcore ABC, right? Like this is not Glengarry Glen Ross. This is not like the peak of realty. This is jobbing it, right? Like still learning, still growing, still getting better at it. And so it sets him in the
So I was just add a bit of a tangential thing, but it's just when you mentioned the 10 years. There's one thing I've got to get off my chest is, you probably talked about this already, but surely they should have made it like 15 or 20 years, because nobody looks like they're only 10 years out of high school in this film. Nobody is 28 in this film.
I suppose that's kind of movie appropriate though, isn't it?
Yeah,
like nobody went,
true. Maybe it's
everyone who would have been the age they would think they were at high school in the movies.
I was going to say, actually, John Cusack was doing teen movies when he was way too old anyway. So actually, I guess that. Yeah. But it always bothered me. It's like, watching it again recently, I was like, hang on, how old are these guys supposed to be? It's like, they look my age almost.
I mean, if this was off the back of Say Anything, it makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's be honest, at least the people who are cast and are in the reunion are playing 10 years older and not having to play 10 years younger.
Well, I mean, it could be as I mentioned, a very meta thing, because John Cusack he was known for doing this kind of teen comedy thing. So I guess it's, it must be. I wonder if he actually, the whole point of him doing this film is kind of referencing that. I don't know if you've discussed this already, but
I mean, we've kind of touched on it.
There is definitely kind of a connection there.
Yeah.
I
mean,
we touched on it a few times.
Yeah, this kind of functional hypothesis, if you've got Say Anything, 10 years later you go into this, and then eventually you get to The War Inc. Kind of complete disillusionment, lack of subtlety in storytelling piece.
But also that's like the fun of it, right? Like the fun of films for us, people like us, is never just the film as it happens on the screen at the time. Yes, that's part of it, but we also like seeing stuff like this where there's an interrelationship between an actor who's actually savvy enough to know what their public image is, and then mess with it or play with it. It's like, this is the same time period where Tom Cruise is doing like his cameo in Magnolia, right? And stuff like that. And then we're only a few years off Tropic Thunder, but like he's like from the same era as Cusack and the same sort of films, but he's now transitioned into major blockbusters. He's got, by this point he's got 2 Mission Impossibles on his belt, etc. But he still takes the time out to go, I know what people expect of me, and I'll deliver that, but I also want to be able to remind people I got an Oscar, right? I can do these other things. And I think that is always, for me, part of the pleasure. I like to see films in which you cast people not just because of who they are and what they can do, but of who they've been. I think it's an important visual shorthand for the audience when you cast somebody who is well known for certain things, either because you want them to play against type, Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West, or because you want them to play to type. And I think that's kind of like what we're getting at here is Cusack's self-comprehension and self-referentiality as an actor. The fact that this is his first one as a producer as well as a co-writer speaks volumes to me about how he perceives himself.
This was minute 38 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, featuring your hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, myself, Dev Sodiger, and my buddy Hugh David.
Today's guest has been, and all this week has been, David Brook. David, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, they can find me at blueprintreview.co.uk, and through there you can find us on Facebook and Twitter or X. And please get in touch and follow what we're doing.
Fantastic. So you can also find us in the same places: YouTube, Twitter, aka X, Spotify, and wherever you're listening to us at this moment. In all cases, our handle is at Debi Radio, DEBI Radio, and our own website is also debiradio.com. Once again, DEBI Radio.
And if you want to talk about the movie, share things with us, give your input, you can do that on our Facebook listeners group. That is Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club. Again, DEBI.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling of movement.